Thanks.
Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Mazzaros from Accenture, and I want to welcome you to our session today on supply chain. I have with me Howard Papula. I hope I'm saying that correctly. From Kroger, welcome. Maybe we could start out with just some quick introductions of both of us. Howard, would you like to kick it off and tell us a little bit about yourself and also your role and how long you've been working in the blockchain space?
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to the organizers. Very happy to be here. So my name is Howard Papula, and I am the Vice President of Corporate Food Technology and Regulatory Compliance at the Kroger Company. I have overall responsibilities for food safety and regulatory compliance, as well as product development and retail food safety across 2,800 retail stores, 33 manufacturing, and about 40 distribution centers. And it's quite a challenging time for us now, if you can imagine. We've got about 470,000 associates who work for the Kroger Company in 38 states here in the United States. I have been in the blockchain space for the last 3 years. I just walked right into it as I started with Kroger. And as our discussion proceeds, I'll have the opportunity of sharing with you some of the initiatives that have been leading at the Kroger Company that bothers on blockchain. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Howard. And for the audience, again, my name is Rich Mazzaros. I'm a managing director at Accenture. I am part of our global blockchain practice. I have been working on blockchain for about the last 5 years, working with clients in this area, as well as developing capabilities within the blockchain space. One of the key areas that I'm focused on currently is around traceability and track and trace of both food and consumer goods. And so that's an area that I spend a significant amount of my time on. And I really think about that from the perspective of traceability of products, so how products move through the supply chain, thinking through raw ingredients to manufacturing and processing, through the logistics, warehouse, and into retail. And then I also think about transparency. And what I mean by transparency is how do we provide information that consumers want to see about the products that they are purchasing and using and bringing home to their families. And so this is everything around the origin, the provenance, the freshness, inspections and certifications. For instance, is that food truly organic, for instance? And that, today, increasingly in today's environment, that the products are safe. And this can be everything from they're not subject to the recall I heard last week to all of the concerns that we hear in today's environment given COVID-19. And so ultimately, when we think about traceability and transparency, this really creates what I call the foundation of consumer trust. And again, I'm focused on both the food area, consumer goods, and also luxury items as well. So Howard, why don't we go ahead and get started, and maybe we can just talk a little bit about the work that each of us are doing from a blockchain in supply chain perspective. Maybe an overview of the type of projects that you're working on. Would you like to start?
Absolutely, Richard. Thank you. Food safety is very important, quite frankly. And you don't have to look too far to understand why it is so important that for every item that we have in our retail stores, we're able to trace back in a situation where we have products compromised as a result of microbial contamination. You look back to fall of last year, as well as spring of last year, there were two big events that defined those periods for us as professionals in the food safety arena. There were two massive leafy greens recall. There was this notion out there that people would throw and say, let's be romaine calm, right? Romaine lettuce was what it was all about. There were contamination as products transitioned from Yuma in Arizona to California, and the same thing transitioning back from California to Yuma. Lots and lots of people became sick as a result. And the questions always remains, how do we leverage blockchain to prevent a situation where investigations can go on for weeks without identifying the source of the problem, or which farm was responsible for the contamination? These, as well as what I would describe as Kroger's moonshot, as making sure that we feed those communities that we work or that we have business in, zero hunger, zero waste. How do we make sure that food products that are otherwise destined for the landfill, but still very, very good, you know, goes to those individuals who are less privileged in our communities? And how does both tie together? When you look at food safety and you look at hunger and waste. When you look at food safety, there are so many items that get compromised because of our inability to be able to understand the source of the problem. And when you have 2,800 retail stores across the nation, that's a ton of products that you're throwing away that are otherwise perfectly okay. That translates into waste. So the crux of what we've been doing at Kroger is finding the blockchain ways to be able to leverage and bring those two areas together. Less product going to the landfill, more product out there on the shelf, and more product out there to satisfy the yearnings of the less privileged in our communities.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the overview of some of the key initiatives that you've been leading at and working towards at Kroger. They are certainly, do speak to the applicability and the unique characteristics of blockchain to be able to solve. Did you, when you focused on those key areas, have you found that identifying specific use cases to engage the ecosystem has been helpful?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when we started the entire project, we worked with IBM, along with several other retailers our size. When we started the implementation process, obviously we ran into issues that every other retailer ran into as well. The grocery store has to remain open every single day. It cannot be shut because people have to eat. And so the appetite wasn't there a lot to bring in a new technology that might meant that retail stores would have to close for a little while for us to get it implemented. Sure. And so it was, it has to be a bite, a chew at a time. So bottom line is that when we started the entire process, you know, we found very, very little in terms of willingness of the ecosystem to adopt this strategy, you know, and we know that this is not something that Kroger just by itself could get done. You know, we needed the support of our suppliers needed the support of their suppliers. And so it's like a chain of organic molecules. You have it broken somewhere and the information is broken. And so the biggest issue that we encountered was ecosystem adoption. And it's still out there today, you know, especially when it comes to the food industry. The ecosystem doesn't believe a whole lot in it, in blockchain. They're starting to understand the dynamics and the opportunities that this newer technology brings to the table. But I will tell you that the adoption has been a little bit of a slow journey.
Yeah. You know, Howard, that's a really interesting point here because it really talks about the importance of engaging the entire ecosystem, in this case, the entire supply chain, to work together to get that transparency in the data. And one of the things that I find, and would love your opinion on this, is that when you start out with a use case, it's really, really important to have a clear view on that use case as well as a clear view on the value pools that are locked today. What is it that you're trying to achieve, and what type of value will that unlock for the supply chain? And also ensuring that you're unlocking that value and understanding that value across the entire supply chain. Because if the value is accretive to, let's say, only one aspect of the supply chain and other areas are impacted in a negative way, you're not going to get that level of engagement that you spoke about is so important to ensure that we're working together as a supply chain, as a supply chain community, to be able to drive this transformation that this technology enables. Would you agree with that? And have you found ways to be, have you found that that focus on value is an important component?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and let me, if I would break it down in the concept of how Kroger operates, you look at Kroger as a company. Kroger's got its own 33 manufacturing facilities, meaning we can control our own destiny from the ingredients we source through our manufacturing facilities to the distribution centers. But we also have well over 5,000 suppliers who also manufacture a Kroger labeled item as well. And those we do not control. You know, the expectation is that they are able to be in control of their system, who they source their raw materials from, how they work in process, and how their finished goods, you know, are presented. For us at Kroger, we can follow the data from when we manufacture up to our distribution center. The challenge comes in when you come to the distribution center. You know, that is where most of the data is lost. And think of it this way. Warehouses are built, they've got slots in them, product goes into slots, they get picked, they get pulled together on pallets, and they go out to the stores. When they get out to the stores, there's not that handshake there that tells them this is where the product is coming from. You know, that is the value that we're trying to unlock. You know, if it is a box of item coming into a distribution center, that by mere click of a finger, I'm able to tell which store that one box went into. And if I need to pull that product back, that I'm able, via phone call, an email, a text message, I'm able to put a hold on that product in the system. Now, it's even bigger value if we're able to get to a point where that box has been broken down and it's been sold to customers, that I can follow that product home to the customer's home. I can, through my loyalty system, call on the customer and say, you have, you know, a unit of mashed potato in your house that you purchased from 212 store. I need to have that product back. I'll have another one shipped to you. Right. It is going to be a bigger value for us, and that's what we need to unlock. It gives us full transparency across the supply chain line.
Yeah, I call that the chain of custody, that we need to be able to see how the product flows through all of those various touch points so that we can track back and provide that, not only that visibility to the consumers, but to your point, when there is an issue with a particular product, be able to proactively notify a consumer so that we can appropriately address that issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maybe let's switch gears for a second. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed, has had a dramatic effect on supply chains. Maybe, you know, thinking about COVID-19, what kind of impact has that had on your priorities over the last, you know, several weeks?
Oh, absolutely. We just have to, we've had to put a hold on everything that we're doing and focus on something that we never planned for, something that we didn't plan to have in 2020. Don't get me wrong, every company has its own business continuity plan, and same thing for us. And we do have the process in place. If we ran into a situation like this, we talk about if we have to work from home, what do we need to do? If we have to keep servicing the distribution centers, what if we lose 40% of employees in a distribution center or a manufacturing facility or a store? We've got everything all simulated, right? But when the real deal hits, that is when you know what the capabilities of the system that you've built. And so for us, this has put a damper on some of the projects that we're working on. Now we're focused more on what we can do to satisfy the yearnings of our customers. When I was looking at some numbers, and I was looking at shoppers' behavior. We're talking, this time last year, we're talking about how shopper behavior is changing. 75% of US shoppers plan to purchase grocery online in 2019 versus 33% of them in 2017. Can you now talk about what that percentage would look like today with the restrictions of movement and the fact that people just have to eat? So what I have seen with COVID-19, it's a little bit of a mixed bag, Our thoughts and prayers goes to those individuals and their families who have been impacted directly, and to those that have been victims of collateral damage of this COVID-19. But what COVID-19, when I look at it and I think back, I'm like, yes, this is truly helping to make my case as to why we need to have transparency across the supply chain, right? We heard of situations where people came into the stores. We've heard stories about paper products being fought over in stores and all kinds of stuff like that. We've got situations where someone drove behind a delivery truck coming into our store, pulled up on the side and asked the driver, what do you got in the back? He doesn't know what he has in the back anyway, he didn't put them there. But think about transparency in the supply chain and what COVID-19 has made that to look like today. So when I look at the supply chain, I'm like, well, COVID-19 is telling us sending a very, very strong message to us. We must take that message and we must act on it, that the old systems that we've had in place is not going to get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Howard. Well said. Thinking about, you mentioned the consumer a moment ago. Let's think about the consumer specifically as it relates to COVID. If you think about over the last several years, consumers have continued to want to see more transparency about the products that they buy, that they serve to their family, that they bring home. In fact, I've seen studies where 2/3 of consumers say that brand trust is an important consideration in the decision of what products they wish to purchase. And conversely, if a brand has an issue, like let's say a recall, that may mean that a percentage of those customers may not go back to the brand when the recall is over, and even though the product is now safe. How do you think the consumer preference for understanding the origin, the freshness of the products that they are purchasing, the claims that the products are saying, for instance, that they're organic, or the grade of food in for instance, and sometimes in certain meats and proteins. How do you think that's going to be impacted because of COVID?
Great question. Great question. Although it's way too early to try and, come to a conclusion on how shopper behavior may change as a result of COVID-19. We've got a situation where people are holding on to the cash that they have. They're trying to trade down a little bit. I was looking at IRI data. More and more customers or shoppers are now looking at private label branded product versus national brand more, because obviously it costs a little lesser. But overall, I think customers are still going to make that demand of retailers and manufacturers. They continue to, we know that shopper behavior is changing and the demographics of shoppers changing as well. People are looking at food as the alternative medicine. So if I don't have to pop a pill, but I can grab a cup of tea, and get the same sort of effect that I need from this tea, whether it's a tea to help me manage my stress versus taking a pill. You know, we're seeing more and more of that. You're seeing those niche restaurants and places just coming up, smoothies and things like that. People are using food to manage some health situation or the other. And so the demand is going to continuously be there for what is the source of this food? Where did it come from? And you know what? This is where we can leverage the blockchain technology as well. You know, imagine a farmer that picks his tea out there in the field, gets the opportunity to be able to provide digital information to the retailer or the manufacturer that is going to pack that tea and be able to pass the same information on to consumers out there. I mean, it makes for a great day when you're able to do this. So rounding that up, I do not see customer expectation tapering down when it comes to their expectation of transparency relative to the source of food that they're spending their hard-earned money on.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well said, Howard. You mentioned a moment ago the shift to digital, and I wanted to maybe dig into that a little bit here for a moment. I also saw some information that Instacart had also disclosed, and that they saw 300% year-over-year increase in users in the month of March. So again, it supports that consumers during this time are making that switch to digital digital grocery shopping even faster than prior to COVID. And obviously that represents its own unique opportunities and challenges. If we think about items like, you know, picking out produce and things like that, where, you know, we as consumers have our methodology of how we might pick out produce that is in the store. When we think about that someone else is shopping on our behalf and now delivering those products, or we're picking those products up curbside, you know, how do we provide that information, that transparency to the consumer that the products are in fact fresh? Any thoughts on that from your perspective, Howard?
Yes, yes. And I'll answer the question two parts. We talked about digital to start. And every quarter, as every retailer has declared their earnings and talked about their performance, you're seeing the growth in their digital marketing and their digital profits as well. You know, I was reading Target as a retailer just put out an advisory today, yesterday or so, you know, even though they saw fewer store traffic, you know, but it was 100% fold increase in their digital business. And so digital continues to grow, and every retailer must be represented in that arena. If you are not represented in that arena as a retailer, you're leaving so much on the table and you are behind time. So that is going to continue to happen. Now, moving on to preference, you know, retailers must understand how to engage their customers. Engaging that customers, understanding what your customer wants, you know, is very, very important. I know retailers very, very well who are involved in pickup operations, and the kind of training that they give their associates is only the best produce should be made available to those individuals who pull up at the side of the stores to pick up. Associates have been trained to understand, you know, this is it. This is what you pick for them. There's also leveraging technology to understand, you know, okay, well, Richard, today you wanted Kroger mac and cheese.
That sounds good.
Good. Unfortunately, we don't have that in stock. May we substitute Kraft mac and cheese for you? If you say yes to it, right, the first time, you say yes to it the second time, we know that, of course, you like Kraft mac and cheese as well. Don't get me wrong, I would love to sell you Kroger mac and cheese all the time. But we do know now that we can substitute that for you, you know. And every retailer must continue to do that, must continue to understand. If you don't have something that a consumer wants, you don't say, no, I don't have it. You ask, what would you prefer? I know in some situation, if you wanted this smaller size and that smaller size isn't available, we trade you up into a bigger size for the price of the smaller size, because it is our fault that we do not have that in stock. And when you order produce, it is the best of produce that you'll get it, because not only are you paying premium for being a pickup customers coming through that drive-through to pick up your grocery, the company also understands the challenges that drove you there. Maybe you have a family of younger children that you don't want to chase after in the store. Maybe you have a very, very busy schedule and you have family at home that you needed to feed, if you can juggle things around. And so we at Kroger always looked at our customers who come through for pickup, and we know that they deserve the best. And we do make the best available for those who come through the stores as well.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things you mentioned, the technology aspect of this, one of the things that we're also very interested in, we're seeing, is the ability to leverage the technology to help tell the brand story about the particular product. And this can be, simply done by, scanning some type of a QR code or a next generation product identifier on the product that then brings up some type of digital experience, let's say on your mobile device. And that allows brands and retailers to be able to provide more information around the product, the ingredients, the quality of the ingredients, maybe even back to, again, with the transparency in the supply chain, information back as to, how that product was grown or raised, for instance, even potentially back to the farm. And so I think as we think about these experiences that we can create leveraging these technologies through digital interactions like on your mobile device, it really provides kind of a new way for brands and retailers to communicate to consumers and tell the story about that product. And I think that's an exciting and interesting area of the space, because not only does that help us potentially in the store to allow the consumer to decide what product they want to purchase in the store, for instance, but even into the home and how that product might be used even after it is home as well. So I think that's another interesting area that we're seeing with the technology as well.
Oh, absolutely. And when it comes to fresh items, think about it this way. Think about the opportunity to be able to take your smart device, scan just a bag, a small container of strawberries, and it tells you that it was picked in Carlsbad in California, and you understand the date that it was picked, and you understand the supply chain journey, and it tells you that on this particular date is the peak of ripeness of this strawberry, and then you look at it and say, that is 3 days after the peak of ripeness for it. Now, it could still be good if you want to eat it fresh. Maybe you're not getting the top quality strawberries that you're looking for, but maybe you're going to be using it as an ingredient in something else. Maybe it's good for you, right? So, there are so many ways in which brand owners, manufacturers could engage their customers using technology,
Absolutely.
And it depends on whatever, your customers care about. If your customers care about, their coffee, the coffee that they're buying, and, they're wondering, what is this company that makes this coffee that I love so much? What are they doing to return to that community that grows the coffee for them? It should be an opportunity right there for the customers to be able to find out. There are so many, bodies out there that could do some verification exercise for you, fair trade. They're all over the place, but it does not substitute for, actual information that you're able to see on your device that takes you back to Ethiopia, where the coffee is grown, and you can see the farmers, and you can see their land and what they're doing, how they tend their coffee, how they're managing their environment in this day and age of climate change. You know, if you're younger folks and you're very, very jazzed about the climate, that's an opportunity to find out some more information on how many trees are being felled to do this operation, to do that operation. I mean, it's a wonderful way to just exchange information. And the information is out there today. We just need the technology enablement to be able to, you know, take that information and funnel it to the consumers.
You know, Howard, it's interesting that you mentioned coffee. This is an area that Accenture has spent some time on as well, and leveraging blockchain and track and trace of products that go through a supply chain, digital identity, and even digital payments to be able to create new capabilities now that we have that full traceability of the product. And so one of the things that that we've been working on is a concept and an application called Circular Supply Chain, which allows the end consumer that might be enjoying that cup of coffee and might want to reward that farmer as to the sustainability practices that they in fact enable to produce that cup of coffee, where you can actually send a tip back to that farmer as it relates to, you know, rewarding the farmer and thanking the farmer for the extra care they took in being able to create that product in that sustainable way. And so I do think that not only does this technology allow for this new transparency, but even allows for these new types of capabilities to be built once we have that transparency in the supply chain that we're all seeking. So I know we've got a few minutes left, Howard. One thing I wanted to make sure that we captured because of your role at Kroger is safety. Obviously, food safety is something that's top of mind for everyone right now, given COVID. Did you want to speak a little bit about what do you think from a food safety perspective, thinking about everything from the food in the stores, but even thinking about what we're seeing from a manufacturing facilities? We all have heard about some of the manufacturing facilities that have been temporarily closed because of maybe an outbreak in that particular facility. Anything that you'd like to talk about in that space, Howard?
So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but if you know the Tysons of this world, if you know the Smithfield of this world, you know, some of them have been they've had to close as a result of a high number of their associates, you know, having tested positive to COVID-19. But the fact of the matter is that those positives that you see directly, you know, has a correlation with the community that those facilities are located in. If you look at those factories, they are not designed for social distancing. You know, if you've been in a harvesting facility for beef, for pork, or chicken before, you would know. You walk in and all you see is just a sea of heads, you know, of humans, you know, doing everything that they could. I mean, could some of the facilities have been could they have gotten ahead of the curve and really do certain things, you know, to whether slowing down their operations to achieve a little bit of social distancing, you know? But the fact remains also that there's a lot of panic buying out there. The pressure was on the manufacturers to put more products out there. But the truth of the matter is that the positives that you're seeing with those facilities are directly correlated with the communities that those plants are located in. You know, there is the community spreading that is going on in those communities. And so it has nothing to do with the facilities physically. Everyone knows that COVID-19 isn't foodborne, you know. The means of infection is respiratory in nature, is never true food, you know, but the concern's always there. And we spent, at Kroger, in my role, we spent, you know, weeks trying to educate everyone, even our own store associates, because, you know, our store associates are also customers at some point in time. You know, right. They can switch their hats. And so we spent a lot of time educating folks on the basic non-pharmaceutical intervention steps that can be taken to avoid, you know, spreading or, you know, getting infected by COVID-19 yourself. But so safety is on one side, but what we've had to do a lot of is educating people around, the soundness of the supply chain from a food safety perspective and what to do, to make sure that everyone stays safe, So it's an interesting time for us as retailers and in the food safety space as well.
Absolutely. So Howard, one more question, and I think we'll open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience, because I think we have about 10 minutes left. So if you think about blockchain in supply chain, the work and the projects that you were doing, what one lesson have you learned, or what one lesson would you like to share, a lesson learned would you like to share with the audience today? I have one as well, but I'd love to allow you to start. And what's the key lesson you want to share with the audience today?
You know what, when you look at all the work that we're doing and you look at what's happening today with COVID-19, they're just so similar in terms of lessons to be learned. Everyone knows that relative to the coronavirus, you don't see it, and people don't walk by you and you see COVID-19 written on top of their head. Heck, they could be asymptomatic. And so when the order is given for people to shelter in place and not go out, because it takes just one person. It takes that cooperation across the board, everyone doing what they need to do in order to make sure that we limit the spread, right? Flip it to the work that we're doing. The biggest lesson that I've learned is that a retailer, whether it's Kroger, whether it's Walmart, will always continue to be that big retailer. But whatever it is that we do to advance food safety, to advance quality, to advance transparency, isn't going to be good enough unless we have the support of our suppliers and their suppliers as well. In essence, ecosystem adoption of what we're trying to do is very, very important. As individuals, we can only do this much, and when we come together as a team, as an organization, we can do a whole lot more. And I'm glad to report today that, back in the day, it's probably a taboo to have someone from Walmart talk to someone on the Kroger side about what we're doing to further food safety. Food safety is no longer a source of competition amongst manufacturers or retailers. We freely share ideas because whatever affects the eye almost certainly affects the nose, and the throat hears about it all the time. My grandfather always says that. So it affects one of us, it affects us all.
Yeah, well said, Howard. I would say that the one key area that in one lesson learned that I have had in working with clients from a supply chain perspective is really the importance and the criticality of a unique product identifier and the identity of the participants and even the devices as you think about how products move through the entire supply chain. Because the ability to be able to identify a unique product, understand where it is in the supply chain, understand its product condition, that it's important to be able to understand and be able to verify the identity of these products as well as the devices that you're interacting with as that product moves through, that it becomes really a foundational layer that becomes important as we think about these use cases that we've been talking about today. So with that, I think we've got about 5-6 minutes, so maybe we've got time for a question or two. Does that sound good, Howard?
Sure.
And I might defer to the moderator here as the best way for us to collect a question from the audience, please. Is the moderator there?
Sure. Yeah, so we have a couple here in the chat, or we also have a couple in Whova. So let's check Whova first to see the top rated questions. Do you have that available? Richard?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you have the Whova app available for the questions?
I'm not logged into the app at the moment. If you can find the top rated question or just read one out, we'll we'll attack it.
Okay. Let's start with one of these in the side because I think it's a good one. So there's one here on the side on what's the perspective of one partner participates in several different ecosystem value chains. How is that made simple? So different legacy systems across different partners within one specific network. How do you kind of mitigate that, and how do you deal with kind of those difficulties there?
So I think, Howard, the question is getting to what I call the notion of interoperability. If we're tracking various information across our systems and thinking about the ecosystem of the supply chain, how do we enable that interoperability so that we can share and update the appropriate information between the parties? Because obviously that's a critical component of, really building the adoption of this capability across the supply chain. Please, do you have a point of view? And I also have some thoughts on that too.
Oh, I tell you what, interoperability is very, very important. And this is one word that we use continuously in the blockchain field, because we know that one company isn't going to have that monopoly of knowledge when it comes to blockchain. But of what use is it if you've built a system that someone else has walked on and you can't share information? So we've always made it. It's a message that we send out to everyone who's dabbled in the blockchain service provider space. Your system has to be interoperable. It has to be able to take information from my system and digest it, because we don't want all our eggs in one basket, quite frankly. We want a situation where everyone's competitive, and you have your own choice of who you want to use or which system you want to use. It's like talking about Microsoft Word document. If you have a Microsoft Word document, you have to be able to open it on an Apple device. Make it that simple. That is the message about interoperability. You can add yours, Richard.
Yeah, Howard, I completely agree. And I think the interoperability issue is really needed to get the level of growth and adoption across the network so that we all can feel comfortable about the products and that we're purchasing and consuming across a very broad set of the marketplace. And I think I often am reminded around a famous quote. I don't know who said it, but it's a basis theory of network, which is all boats rise in a rising tide. And I think that really speaks to the value that's created when all of these systems are interoperable and we can be able to share the appropriate data with the appropriate parties for the appropriate person for the appropriate time period that's needed to be able to provide not only the optimization in the supply chain, but also the transparency that consumers are looking for today.
Totally agree.
So do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, totally. So there's one here on really just kind of getting more insight on the process of getting C-suite buy-in and how you went about building your blockchain system. So like, where did you start? Did you pilot? And then how did you expand from there?
Howard, do you want to start?
Yeah, so see, one thing that we're learning is this, that, when we started to talk about the blockchain project, when you look at what it's going to take for us to be able to do it, the best way to sell this project to the C-suite is all about making it that total solution. It's one heck of an investment to make on just food safety or food waste alone. Think about the transparency it brings to your supply chain. Investigate the advantages that it brings in. I remembered walking into one of our warehouses and I laid it out for the warehouse manager. I asked him, what if you had this tool? Oh, I can process twice what I'm processing right now. Can you put a price on that? Can you add it to the books? And can you take that in and talk to the C's and say, look, there's so much in terms of advantages to be gathered here. Don't make this just a compliance project. It's never ever gonna fly. The cost associated with this isn't gonna allow the compliance piece to just fly by itself. And so look for opportunities company-wide. And we know that the opportunities are there, whether it's from a transparency, whether it's customer satisfaction, whether it's, supply chain efficiencies, there are advantages to be leveraged all across the board.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would add that I think it starts with having a very clear view on the use case. And really, and it's selecting an initial use case to start from. You may have other use cases that you want to expand to in the future, and that's great, but starting with a very specific use case and then really having a very, very clear view on the value pool that you're trying to unlock. And I think also it's around, looking in your ecosystem, identifying the key partners that are willing to take this journey with you and are willing to innovate in this space with you. And at that point, then it's about, getting into market with a minimum viable product to start with, and then using that as a basis to continue to expand into other areas of the ecosystem and other use cases as well. And I think it's also important that you think about the governance structure right up front as well, thinking about how will you actually govern the use of this technology, of this solution across that ecosystem to be able to unlock that value that you've defined. And the last point I would say that's important is also acknowledging and understanding, and from the starting point, building out the appropriate change management processes as well. As we think about how this technology is evolving, how the ecosystem is evolving, how you want to bring on additional use cases, thinking about the process that you'll use to be able to evaluate those changes, to understand the impact, to have engagement across the ecosystem of that change, and then to be able to implement that change across that entire ecosystem. I think that's also a key component too.
One last thing that I can add real quick here is one word that we haven't used. And when I think of interoperability, I also think about privacy. We're in a world where we're talking about big data here. We're talking about how we share data, how we leverage it across the board. We haven't said anything about privacy, So there must be transparency relative to how private this data is going to be. If someone is going to be somewhere harvesting this data and making money off of it, we need to let the users know who this data is going to be shared with. And if it's not going to be shared, we need to be able to make it clear that it's not going to be shared. And we have to make the users confident enough to be able to come in and know that their data isn't going to be compromised. For that farmer who's going to share their data about the lettuce that they just harvested and the field that they're leaving unharvested because it came up positive for E. coli, and they're going to put that note in it, they need that assurance that that information isn't going to be public because they've not compromised anything. They did not harvest that farm. They just left it there. So privacy has to be addressed in every one of these systems, as well as interoperability.
Yeah, I agree. The data confidentiality and ensuring that we know who has access to what data elements, for what purpose, what time period, that's an important characteristic, that's an important element. And quite honestly, it's one of the unique features that blockchain can provide as well. So great point, Howard. With that, I want to say a big thank you to Howard. Thank you so much for your time, your insights today. I enjoyed talking with